Westers love my love, and the wind brings up the rain, and might apart lie we, my love, and seas between the twain. I know not if it rains, my love, in the land where you do lie, and oh so sound you sleep, my love, you know no more than I. Hi, I'm David Harley. You've just been listening to Tears of Morning, the title track from an album that I'm going to tell you more about. As a genuine Shropshire lad, I spent the first 20 odd years of my life in Shrewsbury, or Shrewsbury as some of the locals insist on calling it. And I've lived there from time to time since, most recently just a block away from Ludlow Castle, which was once the home of the Council of Wales and the Marches. So I guess it was inevitable that the county would influence my music. After all, I first fell in love with folk music there, though it wasn't until I went to college that I first started to play serious guitar. While the songs and tunes on Tears of Morning aren't all directly related to the county, perhaps having lived amid all that history made it easier to write a song like The Song of Chivalry, which looks at the class divide filtered through the impact of the 100 Years' War. Remember, you heard it here first. When my Lord returned to his sheets of silk, and his gentle lady of Muskin Mill, the minstrels sang in the gallery their songs of slaughter and chivalry. By contrast, the deceptively named Castles and Kings refers not to medieval history, but to Great Western steam engines, being a recollection of growing up obsessed with train spotting and growing into a 20th century nomad. I like to think of it as a sort of West Midlands train blues. I was a kid in a country town, I had nothing better to do. I'd teeter around by the railway bridge on my way home from school, leaning over the bridge with my chin in my hands, too young for wonder and why. I'd wait what seemed hours for the signal to change, wait for a train to go by. In the mid-70s, I was working in a hospital in Berkshire, and one evening I found myself spending the evening in my little room in the nurse's home, looking through a copy of the Shrewsbury Folk Club magazine that had somehow followed me there, which I suppose gives you some idea of how exciting my social life was at that time. Anyway, I found an article written there by Ron Nurse about Thomas Anderson, who was executed in Shrewsbury, or Shrewsbury if you insist, in 1752 in the wake of the Jacobite Rebellion. I was gripped by the story and just had to use it as the basis for a song. By the way, I don't play violin or flute. Where you hear either instrument on that track, it's actually a rather versatile Yamaha keyboard. In medieval times, the shoemakers of Shrewsbury had an arbour or guild hall, like so many of the guilds. Only the arbour gateway survives today, and even that was moved a century and a half ago from Kingsland to the Dingle. The Dingle is actually part of the park known as the Quarry. The gateway has two rather damaged statues representing Crispin and Crispinian, or Crispian, the patron saints of cobblers, tanners and leather workers. One version of their story has it that they were executed in the 3rd century AD for preaching Christianity to the Gauls while earning their crust as shoemakers. Another version of the story associates them with Kent, and Faversham in particular. Thomas Anderson was buried in St Mary's churchyard following his execution some distance away across the river where Shrewsbury School now stands. I once looked for his gravestone, but I couldn't find it among all the moss-covered stones. Curiously enough, I've sung the song many times in the Loggerheads, a pub just across the road in St Mary's Street, which hosts lots of music sessions. At least, it did in more normal times. We are but images of stone. Do us no harm, we can do none. Saint Crispin and Saint Crispian are we, on the arch of the shoemaker's arbour. On the 10th of June, 1752, in a house called the Crown, which stood on Pride Hill, John Richard's workmen received a week's pay. There they stayed and drank their fill. When a redcoat patrol chanced to pass by, men mocked and reviled them, singing Jacobite songs. Who struck the first blow, no one was sure, but a bloody riot soon raged through the town. That song actually presented me with something of a problem. It became rather popular in the area, which was nice, but it sat rather awkwardly among the curious mixture of blues and shanties that constituted most of my repertoire at that time. However, while I was visiting my parents in Manchester, I started to reread Houseman's A Shropshire Lad for the first time in years. And before I knew it, I'd written settings for the songs named here as Bredon Hill, The Carpenter's Son, and Severn Shore. So suddenly my repertoire looked a little more Shropshire-oriented, although Bredon is actually in Worcestershire. And in any case, I sounded a little bit folkier, which may or may not be a good thing. I've put music to a number of other poems by Houseman over the years, and some of those have found their way onto this album. Breathe My Lute was written by Houseman as a teenager, so it was long before A Shropshire Lad. It represents the thoughts of Lady Jane Grey the night before her execution. He always had a cheerful cast of mind. When I Was combines two extracts from A Shropshire Lad, looking at two different aspects of youthful love. Tears of Morning, which introduces this podcast or video, whichever you're listening to, sets two extracts from Last Poems, and is immediately followed by Seafret. That's because both share a common theme, being about the death many miles away of a lost love. However, Seafret is all my fault. The somewhat jauntier Ballad of the Arbitrary is also a setting. In this case, of a poem by someone with the initials WHB, probably written around the late 18th century. I found the words in a Shropshire-focused Facebook group, which goes to show that Facebook is good for something apart from fake news. The instrumental Moonflow 3 has no real connection with Shropshire, or the moon if it comes to that, except that it happened to be written and recorded in Ludlow. An extended version called Moonflow 6, featuring electric guitar overdubs, has been released as a single. For the album, though, I wanted to preserve an acoustic feel. The next album is likely to be a little less purist. The instrumental track Carpentry is a different take on the tune I wrote for the Carpenter's Son. After I moved from Shropshire to Cornwall, I found myself travelling very regularly back to Shropshire to keep an eye on my 90-something mother. The words to Wrekin, the Welsh Marches line, were mostly written on a train between Shrewsbury and Newport, on the way home from one of those visits. It's the play out on the album as well as on this introduction to the album. Appropriately enough, Houseman gets a reference in the last verse. The abbey watches my train crawling southwards. Thoughts of Catfire kneeling in his cell. All along the marches line, myth and history, prose and rhyme, but those are tales I won't be here to tell. The hill is crouching like a cat at play, its beacon flashing red across the plain. Once we were all friends around the Wrekin, but some will never pass this way again. With all the anchor